Welcome to 360 Money Matters, where financial planners Billy and Andrew talk all things financial planning. This podcast aims to increase your knowledge and confidence with all things money. Each week, they will cover topics like wealth creation strategies, investment principles, creating passive income, paying off your debt faster, and much, much more, so you can live a life on your terms without limits.
Hello and welcome back to the 360 Money Matters podcast. I'm Billy and I'm joined by my co-host,
Andrew.
Andrew, good to be back again in the recording studio with you. How's things?
Recording studio or our boardroom?
Hey, we want to talk it up a little bit. We got these new microphones and bits and pieces, so hopefully the audio is coming out better. We've worked out the acoustics of the room.
That was an interesting, I know we're going on a bit of a tangent here right at the start of the podcast, which is never a very good sign, but that was a bit of an interesting one. We were sitting on opposite sides of the room, found that some of our earlier recordings, it was quiet on one side, loud on the other. Who would have thought that it would make that much of a difference?
Changing positions in terms of the room that we're sitting in has made the biggest difference, I think, to the audio, as opposed to, I thought, a microphone, even though we have upgraded the mic. So hopefully we come across and we sound a hell of a lot better. But
Till we start getting some emails in. Still sounds crap.
We might need to go into a professional studio, but thanks for giving that away, Andrew. But we're having a bit of fun with this topic today in the lead up to Christmas. So we wanted to have a bit of a banter and bits and pieces, because it's definitely, we might put it nicely and say that I'm passionate about, and it'll probably come out during the recording, but
Passionately negative?
Hey, for good reason too, and I'm sure it'll come across. But Andrew, run us through it. What are we talking to our listeners about today?
Yeah, today we're talking about the dreaded buy now and pay later. Christmas comes around, you're spending money on Christmas presents, and it's always a festive time of year. You're doing lunches, you're doing dinners, you're wanting to catch up with people that you haven't seen over the course of the year and get it all done and in while the year is still 2021. And you find out that you don't actually have enough cash in your bank account. And so what do? You go to your buy now and pay later services. Sounds perfect, doesn't it, Bill?
In a perfect world, but unfortunately, it's the mechanism. So actually, let me backtrack. All of that discipline that we've been talking about throughout the podcast.
Out the window.
And sun's shining, your mates are going out, you've got no cash. All of a sudden, you can go, you kick the can down the road, you buy now or enjoy it now and you pay for it later. Really is a mechanism to overspend, which at its very core is the thing that I disagree with the most, because it causes so many more issues down the track, which we'll talk about. But essentially and conceptually, it sounds great. Do something now and worry about it later, but it quickly stacks up and you forget how much money you spent previously when the piper comes home to call it in, I guess, so to speak.
Exactly right. I mean, it's obviously hugely popular. Like, this is something that Australians are doing. They're utilizing these services, and you only need to look at Afterpay share price to really be able to see how popular these services are.
Square, one of the biggest merchant companies in the world, have made the biggest acquisition or proposed acquisition. I don't think it's been given the green light yet. The biggest proposed acquisition of an Australian company in history. Immensely popular. Share price went absolutely crazy if you have a look at the charts. A lot of exposure in the media. There's a lot of other companies trying to mimic what they're doing as well too. Latitude Pay, Zip Pay are just some of the other providers that are in the market as well too. I think some of the big four are starting to have a think about it as well too, because they're seeing that market share is going and they want to try and capture some of that as well too. Immensely popular.
And I think what we're seeing, this is just from a personal point of view, and maybe because I'm looking out for it. So obviously being a financial advisor, your perception is a little bit skewed as well. But I don't think that we're seeing the same rhetoric around buy now, pay later as to what you're seeing with personal loans, credit cards, and those types of traditional buy now and pay later services. You're not seeing that negativity around, you're not seeing that don't do it kind of attitude around it. It's almost something that's celebrated. I don't know. It's a weird one.
I mean, look, you're absolutely right. But I guess when you think about it, traditionally with a personal loan, if you think about the loan application process, it's very formalized and it takes some time. And usually when you do go through that, it's for might be a bigger purchase. You want to buy a car, or even to the extent where you can fund a holiday. Whereas with the buy now, pay later space, and it's very, very clever in terms of marketing, but you think about the technology piece that sits on that, the user experience, you can jump on your smartphone and essentially away you go and you're done and dusted. So it doesn't have the same stigma. The barriers to entry are a lot less. you're paying it back over, 4 equal installments, assuming that you manage to make those payments. So the debt's paid back a lot quicker, whereas a personal loan can take a lot longer for it to do. Not that it's in a different category by itself, but it almost is. And definitely the technology piece and the user experience helps drive its uptake and helps drive the popularity of it. No doubt about it. And then you've got the benefit of the merchants as well too, because they're seeing obviously more sales going through the till because people have found another mechanism to spend without needing to find money for it today. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where you're going into this agreement, and whether you see it as a loan agreement or not, it's ultimately a loan agreement. But you're going into this loan agreement, or most people are going into this loan agreement sporadically. They're doing it at peak emotion. You've found the item that you want, you can't pay for it, or you don't want to pay for it. And it's really easy to do on the spur of the moment when your sort of emotions are high, as opposed to, as you were saying, and it sort of taps into that sort of credit card mentality that people have had, not just in the past, but currently as well. It's really tapping into your emotional side when you're right there, ripe and ready for them, right for the picking.
I mean, look, let's not beat around the bush here and let's call a spade, right? The whole purpose of this thing is designed to take more money out of your pocket. It's no different to a credit card. It's no different to anything from a marketing perspective. You're trying to get people to spend money. And this is just another mechanism to be able to do that. It is borrowed money. It is debt. It does still give you the ability to spend more than you earn.
So when you spend it over Christmas, you do get a present. It just doesn't come at the end of December. It comes a little bit later on.
Well, this is the benefit, right? You get 2 presents. You get the original item that you purchased. So you get that dopamine hit and away you go. But then you get the present when the withdrawal starts coming out of your bank account because you have to pay this stuff off. So it's the gift that keeps on giving, right?
And that's if it comes out of a bank account. I mean, one of the things that's happening all too often is people have a buy now, pay later service, and then they're paying that back through a credit card.
I didn't even know that you could do that, Andrew. Yeah. There you go. That's how against this stuff I am.
Debt to pay down debt. And there was actually a study that came out. 1 in 6 people take out another loan in order to pay back the buy now, pay later. 1 in 6. That's massive. I mean, when you consider what this is designed or has been marketed for, you buy an item, you don't have the money now, you're going to pay it off in 4 installments, short-term loan. They advertise a 0% interest rate, and we'll talk about some of the other hidden costs and all of that associated with it. But to take out a loan to pay back a buy now, pay later service is completely contrary to what this is marketed for. And that's a huge number of people that are doing that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And especially if you then couple that with, and it's changing slightly, and we'll lean into that in a sec, but where the buy now, pay later service is being used, traditionally it's just been retail. So you're spending money and 1 in 6 people are paying that back, the debt back with debt, essentially. It's essentially consumer debt for retail. And with, I guess, the vast majority of retail, you could probably defer that purchase, I'd say in most cases, until you've actually saved up the money to buy that particular item. But it's actually changing our tastes, and not our taste, it's actually changing our habits about how we shop. We don't have to save up that money. We can go and buy it now and then worry about it at some stage later down the track. So,
and you were actually telling me earlier, weren't you, that they're starting to introduce some of this stuff, not just in retail spending, in other areas as well.
Well, this is really scary because I think it's Afterpay, the leaders in this field. I think they've just made a deal. The name slips me, but they've gone and made a deal with a hospitality chain, and you can now use Afterpay, go to your local pub or whatever it may be, and you buy your meal and your drinks and stuff. You can put that on Afterpay. That just honestly just blows my mind, and I can't understand why anybody would consider doing that.
That's insane. I feel bad. I mean, they don't have a chance to refute themselves, and it feels like this is just a bashing session, which it shouldn't be. It should be more of a warning.
Yeah, no, it
is. You can tell we're having a bit of fun with this one. Yeah, I couldn't see a world where going to the pub, getting a meal, and having to pay for it on Afterpay, it blows my mind. If that's the case, I hate to be as blunt and honest about this, but you shouldn't be going to the pub. I mean, if you can't pay for it.
You don't have the money, you shouldn't be doing it. 100%. 100%. And one of the reasons why I'm sort of so sort of emotional about this is because, and I have such a strong opinion, is because from a financial planning perspective, it's this type of stuff that people can get into, essentially undoes all of the good habits that they need to in order to secure their financial future. And it's very easy to fall into this trap. And once you're on that cycle, I think it's very, very difficult to pull yourself out of it. So it kind of goes against, it's one of the tools that essentially does the opposite of what we try and do for our clients day in, day out. So that's the reason why it sort of hits a nerve with me. Absolutely.
Yeah. And we've seen so many people that have just fallen into that trap. And whether it's this buy now, pay later, whether it's credit cards, whether it's personal loans, I mean, they all sort of feels like we're constantly playing a tug of war. And on the other side and competing party against us is ultimately these types of services and these types of products, which really I get that there's a place for it. And I understand that some people can have the discipline around it and utilize some of the benefits without falling into the trap. But the vast majority of people, we're playing a tug of war between wealth creation and the small dopamine hits that you're getting something that ultimately you can't afford and paying for it later. And paying for it literally and figuratively. You're paying for it later.
Absolutely. And I mean, look, it all sounds rosy, I guess. You go and buy something now and you pay for it later in 4 equal installments. Great, fantastic. When it's working, it's working. Even if you overspend a bit, okay, yeah, sure. Tell us, Andrew, you don't make a payment. You miss a payment because you couldn't forecast properly, or you just simply ran out of money, or whatever it may have been.
You overspent because that's what this is designed to get you to do.
What happens? Because these guys are making money somewhere, right? They're not giving this stuff away for free.
Well, there's costs involved as well. I mean, firstly, as you sort of touched on, there's late payment fees. And that's where the vast majority of money is made on these, is you're making late payment fees. They expect that that's going to happen with a portion of the people that are utilizing these services. It's one of those things where there might be a 0% interest rate, but some of these services where there's monthly account keeping fees, there's payment processing fees, there's establishment fees. I mean, not all of these services are the same. Some of them have some hidden costs, others have other hidden costs. And not that I want to encourage this at all, but if you are utilizing these services, you need to compare with others on the market because they're not all the same. I mean, and I'm probably jumping ahead, but I think that everyone can see the writing on the wall as to where this podcast is heading. Don't use it. Just don't do it.
Yeah, if you had to sum it up nicely, just stay the hell away. I mean, one of the things that I see from our end, especially with the clients that we're doing a lot of work for, obviously as part of a wealth creation conversation, we're talking to them about their debt, mortgage, primarily for their owner-occupier, investment debt for an investment property. One of the things that we're seeing that's impacting the loan application process, and that can be tedious at the best of times, is if you've got buy now, pay later services on there, the lenders absolutely hate it. For good reason too. But we're finding
it's pretty ironic when you were just talking about earlier that some of the lenders are starting to get into those.
Well, they're starting to think about it. I don't think they're in there yet, but yeah, absolutely. But they go absolutely crazy about it and they do not like it at all. Once again, it's from a lending perspective, it's sort of money that you've got in or coming in from your income versus money going out with your expenses. Once again, this drives up your expenses, and it's not just driving up your expenses at point of sale. It's driving up your expenses for 4 equal installments after that point of sale transaction effectively. So it makes managing your cash flow a lot harder. And from a loan application perspective, what we've needed to do with clients time and time again is essentially counsel them and say, hey, stop your buy now, pay later activity, get that off your transaction listings, and then let's pick this up again in another couple of months' time when you've gotten out of that habit, because we can't present this to a lender. They will look at that and they will just shake their head and say, no, we're not interested in lending you any money.
Which is pretty crazy when you think about it. I mean, if someone is looking for a home loan application, they've got a deposit or some sort of a deposit. And so ultimately you're utilizing these services because psychologically it makes things feel a little bit better because you're not spending that deposit and all of that stuff. But is that $100 t-shirt more important than the, I think in the last podcast, we talked about $1 million median property price. Is that $100 t-shirt, less important than that $1 million property purchase? Is it that detrimental, or do you want to have that level of detriment to what you're trying to achieve and what you're trying to do on your wealth creation strategy, all for the sake of one item that ultimately is only going to decline in value in most instances?
Well said, Andrew, but I don't have to pay for it today. So we'll worry about it. We'll kick the can down the road. But
that's future Billy's problem,
That's exactly right. But look, what's some of the things that we can sort of talk to our listeners about in terms of if they are contemplating this, or if they are in that particular environment where they're used to using the Afterpays of the world or the buy now, pay later? What are some of the things that we can talk to our clients about in terms of either trying to improve that position, or I guess a preference from my perspective would be to break that habit and get out of it completely? I mean, that's no big surprise, but what's some of the things that we can talk to people about to try and help them on this journey?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first point to start at is cutting up your virtual credit card, which is essentially what it is. Turn off the app, turn off the system, and stop feeding into it more.
Stop digging.
Yeah, exactly. When you're in a hole, what do? You stop digging. That's the first thing. Don't get any further down the rabbit hole. And the only way to do so is to basically stop utilizing those services. I mean, when we talk about, and I'm sure that you've heard it many times on this podcast, but when you talk about cash flow strategy and ultimately the bucketing strategy that should be deployed when you're managing your own cash flow, it's impossible to manage when you've got the buy now, pay laters coming out. You don't know how much you're spending because your expenditure today is not reflective of your actual expenditure, because that's going to come in over the course of the next few weeks or months. Really stopping the habit, making sure that you're spending from the areas that you should be spending, you're allocating a budget towards it, you've got a cap as to what you're spending, and not going beyond it is ultimately one of the mechanisms to get out of this rabbit and this sort of maze.
Set yourself a limit and stick to it, which goes back to the fundamental principles of what we were talking about in earlier podcasts around your money management. I guess it's no different with this, and being able to overspend. That's kind of the hot topic here, or the hot button here, is this gives you the ability to do that. So needing to come back to those first principles. The first thing to do is obviously stop doing it, and then taking stock of where you're at, I guess. Yeah,
and accounting for it in your budget. I mean, once you stop doing it, recognize that, hey, there's X amount of money that's going to come out over the next period of time. I need to account for it in my budget. And so one of the things that I need to do so that I don't go into further debt, because you also, the next thing that you want to do is not be one of those 1 in 6 people that utilizes debt to pay back this debt. You don't want to have to take out a credit card or a personal loan because you need to pay for all your other expenses. Yeah, you might have gotten out of one hole, but you've just jumped from one to another. You want to make sure that, okay, for the next period of time while I'm paying this back, and this is really a short-term loan in nature, over that period of time, I need to reduce my expenditure. I need to make sure that I'm not going to be paying this back with further debt. And it's not just paying this back. There's always a sleight of hand and cheeky way to do it. And, oh no, I didn't actually pay it back with debt. I paid it back with money in my bank account, but then I needed to take out a credit card so that I could pay for groceries for that month. That's still paying it back with debt.
Sleight of hand.
Exactly. That's still paying it back with debt. So you have to make sure that the only way to do so, because if you're utilizing it, it means that you're spending more than what you're earning. And so really the only way to get out of it is to make sure that over that period of time while you're paying it back, you're spending less.
Yeah, well said, Andrew. And even one step better, if you can avoid getting into it in the first place,
that's the best place to be.
Miles ahead. I don't know who's in that position or who's not, but if you're not in that position, definitely don't do it. It's interesting when you break this stuff down. I think psychologically, it's more of a psychological issue as well too, where you just need to have discipline around your money management. And it all really comes back to being disciplined around that and having a good system, making sure that you're not overspending, utilizing a budget, working within the parameters of your budget and your surplus. And if you're managing your money properly, you can still make allocations to spending stuff on consumer spending. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
We all do it. It's something that you should be doing. I think you work hard and you need to make sure that you enjoy it, but enjoy it within your means.
Well, that's what makes the economy tick, right? Makes the economy turn around. So absolutely, we don't want to stop that activity because it does provide products and services to the broader community. There's definitely a smarter way of doing it. And yeah, if we can avoid the buy now, pay later position, then obviously that's a really prudent move. And that's something that we always encourage our listeners and more directly our clients when we are talking to them about this stuff.
And think about it. I mean, think about how you're spending money. Think about where you're spending money. Think about what method you're actually spending it with. And I know, again, sort of going off on a bit of a tangent, but the amount of times that I've seen clients that have a credit card debt and money in their savings account comes back to that psychology. What are you doing? You're paying a 20-something% interest rate in order to feel like psychologically you have an amount of money in savings. It's exactly the same thing with this Afterpay stuff. Like, what are you doing? You've got the money for it. Like, you don't need to do it. You don't need to throw your cash flow out of whack. You don't need to throw your strategy out of whack. You don't need to feel good about looking at a positive number because you don't scroll further down on your app and see the negative number. Just think about what you're doing.
That psychology can't be downplayed. I mean, if you think about the amount of money that gets spent with advertising, with marketing budgets, there's some very smart people trying to solve, I wouldn't necessarily say a problem, but they're trying to solve the question of how do we get people to spend more money? And the person, I mean, you just take one look at it, but the person that came up with the slogan about retail therapy, absolute genius, absolute genius. But it sounds good and it's slick and everybody remembers it. But I think the pain that it's caused for some people, overspending, is a real challenge. And then you go and couple that with what we're looking at here with a buy now, pay later option, and just puts that on turbocharge for sure.
In summary, don't do it.
just in case the message wasn't clear. Yeah.
Make sure that Santa's the only one that's bringing you a present this year.
Just one present.
Not these services that are bringing it a few weeks later.
You don't want the present in early January, right? You wake up from the Christmas hangover and then go, what have I done?
Nah, very nice. Well, always a bit of fun to jump on these podcasts with you, Bills. Always a pleasure. And I guess if we're doing this podcast in the lead up to Christmas and New Year, for all those that are celebrating Christmas, Merry Christmas. For all those that are celebrating Hanukkah, Happy Hanukkah, and all of those in between. I'm not going to go into.
We just call them the festive season,
exactly.
Right? Because we don't know. Look, as always, thank you to our listeners. Hopefully, you got a fair bit of value out of what we were talking about today. Hopefully, you saw some of the passion come through this time about this particular topic that Andrew and I are so passionate about. Like always, if you wanted further information or if you wanted to have a chat, feel free to reach out to our team, and we'll look forward to catching you on the next one.
Thanks very much for listening. Looking forward to it.
Thanks for listening today. If you have any questions on what we talked about or would like to have a chat about your money journey, visit us at 360fs.com.au.
Just a reminder to our listeners that the information contained in this podcast is general in nature and it is not intended as personal recommendations for the audience. Please consider whether the information suits your circumstances before acting on it. This information is provided by Billy Amaritis and Andrew Nicolaou of 360 Financial Strategists Proprietary Limited, authorised representatives and credit representatives of AMP Financial Planning.